My husband asked for a divorce to marry my sister, and 4 years later, he looked at the boy standing behind me and froze in shock. The child was a miniature version of himself, but he was calling his worst enemy Daddy. My sister, Chloe, had just returned to the States when my husband, Thomas, handed me the divorce papers, stating our marriage was over. I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces, but I signed them despite the agony. Then, carrying his unborn child, I married his sworn rival. For years later he stared at the boy, an exact copy of himself, calling his nemesis Dad. His eyes filled with rage. The pregnancy test had shown 2 lines before I could even process the joy. Thomas threw a document at my face. "Claire, let's get a divorce. Sign this agreement, and it'll give you an extra $20 million. I looked at the man, impeccably dressed in his bespoke suit, his face cold, and I couldn't even nod. Thomas was growing impatient. When we married, we signed a prenup. Our marriage has a 3-year term. It ends in a month. If you don't agree now, the contract expires automatically, and you won't get a cent of that extra $20 million. I took a deep breath. "Thomas, what if I told you I was pregnant?" I admitted desperately. Even in that moment, I tried to use the child as a pretext to keep him. Thomas's family, the Millers, didn't have many heirs, so for the sake of the baby, maybe he would waive the divorce. But his next words chilled my blood. "I had a vasectomy. That child can't be mine." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Thomas had been my only man. If it wasn't his, whose was it? When someone doesn't believe you, any explanation is useless. Thomas left, leaving me staring at the divorce settlement with a blank mind. My marriage to Thomas had been a mess from the start. 3 years ago, the one who was supposed to marry him was my sister, Chloe. But she fled the country right before the wedding, chasing true love in Europe. To maintain the merger between our families' firms, I was forced to marry him in her place. Thomas's family agreed just to save face. I had been in love with Thomas for 7 years, so I didn't refuse. The only one unwilling was him. I don't know what other people's wedding nights are like, but on mine, Thomas threw a contract at me, the same 3-year marriage agreement. After those 3 years, regardless of my wishes, the marriage would end. I felt lost and hurt, but I didn't give up. I thought if I treated him well, Thomas would change. Chloe was abroad, and I was by his side. Someday he would see my value. For 3 years, I cared for him meticulously. He had stomach issues, so I studied holistic nutrition and specialized recipes. He suffered from migraines and insomnia, so I learned therapeutic massage and acupressure. In retrospect, I was so naive. Who falls in love with their live-in help? Forget it, we were just torturing each other. With a trembling hand, I tried to sign the papers. Suddenly my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Claire, your sister is back. She arrives this afternoon. Come over for dinner with Thomas." My mother sounded unusually happy. Why did she come back so suddenly? I asked, my voice raspy. I always felt that man in London wasn't good, my mother sighed. But Chloe insisted on marrying him. Later he showed his true colors, cheating on her even when she was pregnant, which caused her to lose the baby. She surely realized her mistake, and that's why she's home. I stopped listening. Suddenly, I understood why Thomas was so anxious to divorce. Chloe was back. I felt like I was living in a paperback novel. Chloe was the protagonist, and I was just a side character. I fell in love with Thomas and married him, but I had to step aside so the heroine could have her happy ending. Chloe couldn't have children, now I would give her mine so they could form their perfect family. But something inside me snapped. I no longer loved Thomas. I dropped the pen and refused to sign. Why should I give in just because Chloe returned? I wouldn't become the villain. I took an Uber to my parents' house in Greenwich. Thomas and Chloe arrived together. Chloe looked more worn out than she had 3 years ago, less radiant, but she was still the center of attention. It had been raining. Chloe was perfectly dry, but Thomas's sleeve was soaked. I could easily picture how he had shielded her with the umbrella, letting himself get drenched. With me, Thomas always walked ahead while I trailed behind. The comparison was inevitable. I suppressed my disappointment and approached with feigned concern. "Honey, you're soaked. You'll get sick, I said, clinging to his arm. You're the pillar of the company, you can't afford to be ill. Let's go get you changed. Thomas tried to maintain his composure, but I was pushing him to his limit. He followed me to the bedroom, and as soon as we entered, he shoved me away. Stop clinging to me. You're my husband, why can't I hug you? Thomas took a deep breath. Did you sign the divorce papers? I'm pregnant. He countered. I told you, I had a vasectomy, he snapped. Are you sure the doctor didn't lie to you? You're the only man I've ever been with. Don't try to sneak out of this, I said coldly. Thomas looked at me with pure fury. What is wrong with you, Claire? For 3 years I had been the Stepford wife, always kind, attentive, and listening to his every word. In reality, I never let things go. If I couldn't make him love me, I would at least make him pay. I crossed my arms and stared him down. What's wrong with me? At least I'm better than someone who doesn't even recognize his own DNA. Thomas was so furious he couldn't even speak. Downstairs, I resumed my gentle act. Honey, I'd love some of that sea bass, but it's all the way at the other end. Could you get some for me? Chloe and Thomas were visibly uncomfortable. Halfway through dinner, Chloe made an excuse to go upstairs, and Thomas got up to go to the restroom. My mother took the chance to scold me in a whisper. Claire, your sister just went through a brutal breakup. You shouldn't treat Thomas like that. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. It was always the same. When Chloe left, they used me as a placeholder. Now that she was back, the world revolved around her again. That night, watching Thomas seethe with rage, I felt a strange satisfaction. Maybe I always had a talent for being the villain. The next day, I slept in until the California sun was high in the sky. It was 8 a.m. When I walked out of the bedroom, I saw Thomas sitting on the sofa with a thunderous expression. Thomas is incredibly picky, especially about his Starbucks-level coffee. Usually, I prepared his breakfast and brew, but today I had no desire to serve him. Sleeping in felt wonderful. Are you hungry? I asked. Thomas didn't answer, but his stomach growled. I'm going to Postmate something for myself. Thomas looked at me in disbelief before slamming the door as he left for the office. I couldn't help but smile and give myself a thumbs up. Good thing I didn't order anything for him. In the afternoon, while enjoying a treatment at a high-end spa, I got a call from the OMAS assistant. Claire, Thomas doesn't like the food at the corporate cafeteria. He hasn't eaten anything. Of course. I was the one who always prepared his gourmet lunches over the years. I had spoiled him with my cooking. Don't worry, I replied. When he's truly hungry, he'll eat. At dinner, I suddenly received a text. It was a photo from Chloe. The image showed a man in profile with a sharp nose and distinct features. It was Thomas. She quickly deleted it with a message. Sorry, sent that by mistake. Looking at that photo and the whole situation, I felt a strange calm. Maybe I really was born to play the villain. The sound of the paper hitting the desk resonated like a gunshot. Thomas pushed it toward me without another word. The divorce settlement. His expression remained impenetrable, as if everything we had lived through together meant absolutely nothing. Sign it, Claire. His tone was sharp, leaving no room for protest. I looked at the contract, feeling something inside me finally snap. Everything I had endured during those 3 years, the unrequited love, the long nights caring for him while I suffered in silence, was vanishing in that instant. Chloe was standing behind him like a shadow, always lurking. My sister, the protagonist of this story, had returned and was reclaiming her place. I tried not to cry, but tears burned behind my eyes. Thomas didn't look away, he was determined. He had used me, and now he was discarding me without a shred of remorse. This is what's best for everyone, Claire, he said, as if he truly believed he was doing me a favor. My fingers trembled as I held the pen. I had loved him, there had been no one else in my life but him. Despite everything, I always thought that one day he might truly see me, that he would realize my value. But he never did. Chloe's return had sealed my fate. The family had also picked sides quickly. My mother had made it clear over the phone that very morning. I always knew you two wouldn't last. It was only a matter of time before Chloe took her rightful place. The knot in my throat tightened. It wasn't just the loss of a husband, it was the complete betrayal of those who were supposed to support me. I had been a placeholder, and now that Chloe was back, I was back in the shadows, worthless, without a future. Is it true that you're pregnant? Thomas asked coldly. Yes, I replied, hoping against all logic that the truth might change something. But he just shrugged as if it didn't matter. You know it's not mine. I had a vasectomy. I'm not going to support a child that isn't mine. I felt as if the ground were opening beneath my feet. It was his child. I knew it. He was the only man I had ever been with. But even that didn't matter to him. He wasn't just rejecting the baby. He was rejecting any connection we could ever have had. With a shattered heart, I signed the papers. I had lost. He and Chloe embraced in front of me, celebrating their victory. There were no apologies, no explanations. I was just a pawn sacrificed in their game. I walked away without looking back. My mother called the next day, insisting I attend a family dinner to say goodbye properly. You have to understand, Claire, Thomas was never for you. He was your sister's destiny. I hung up without saying goodbye. That was the last time I spoke to my family. It was clear I had no place there. I was alone, but I didn't care. It was better than begging for love where I was never welcome. The first months after the divorce were hell. With the pregnancy advancing and no support from anyone, I moved to a new city, far from my family and everything that reminded me of Thomas. I found a small job at a bookstore, just enough to survive and prepare for the baby's arrival. Every kick from the baby inside me was a reminder of my purpose. If Thomas didn't want him, I would take care of him. I would be enough. And then one day, without planning it, life crossed my path with Richard. I had known his name for years, Richard, the ruthless rival who had dedicated his life to crushing the Miller family's business interests. He was a man feared by many, a calculating strategist whom everyone preferred to avoid. I met him by chance during a tech summit where I was working as a temporary event coordinator. Initially, our interactions were brief. He was cold and distant, exactly as I expected a man with his reputation to be. However, during one of our meetings, something changed. Richard listened to my story, not because I wanted to tell it, but because he knew how to read between the lines. It seems we both know the taste of betrayal, he said with a barely perceptible smile. It was in that moment I understood that he too had been deeply hurt. That connection, that silent understanding, was the beginning of something unexpected. It wasn't love at first sight, it was a slow construction built on late-night conversations, small gestures, and above all, the relief of feeling accepted without conditions. Richard never questioned my pregnancy or made me feel less because of my past. When my son was born, he welcomed him as if he were his own from the very first second. Every time I saw him holding the baby, I realized that I had finally found a home. The day our son called him daddy for the first time, a part of me was finally liberated from the weight of the past. Thomas had rejected the most valuable thing in my life, but Richard had received him with open arms. That was the first victory on my road to redemption. Richard became the anchor that allowed me to rebuild my life. With him, there were no empty promises or hidden conditions. He accepted my past and loved my son as if he were his own legacy. In his arms, I found the peace I never had with Thomas. Our relationship evolved naturally. There were no theatrical moments or grand confessions, it was a love woven into daily routine. And the trust we built bit by bit. Richard was everything Thomas never was. Protective without being oppressive, present without being invasive. As our son grew, his resemblance to Thomas became increasingly evident. The same dark hair, the piercing eyes, and that slightly crooked smile. But in his gestures, in the way he imitated Richard, it was clear who his true father figure was. Seeing Richard lift him up and teach him how to ride a bike was a silent satisfaction. A personal victory I savored every day. I left behind my old self, that woman who was once submissive and eager to please. Now I was someone new, strong, decided, and above all free. I learned to enjoy every moment without feeling guilty, to be happy without asking for permission. Every smile from my son was a reminder that I had chosen the right path. Richard involved himself completely in our life. Every birthday and achievement was celebrated as a family triumph. Our house was filled with a joy I had never experienced in my previous marriage. And although Thomas still lingered in my mind, he did so only as a shadow of the past, a distant memory of what had been lost. Fate, however, always finds a way to bring pending accounts back around. For years after the divorce, the moment arrived when our paths would cross again. It happened at a high-profile charity gala, the kind of event where the most influential families in New York are expected to appear. Richard and I had been invited by his business circle, and though I knew there was a chance I'd run into Thomas, I decided to go. I had nothing to fear anymore. I wasn't the same woman he had abandoned. The night was proceeding without incident until I saw Thomas across the ballroom. He was with Chloe, looking as polished and radiant as ever. They saw me too, but what caught Thomas' attention wasn't me. It was the little boy running behind me, a miniature copy of himself. I saw his face freeze in a mix of disbelief and fury. Chloe noticed it as well, but unlike him, she simply pressed her lips together in a grimace of discomfort. They knew what it meant. The child Thomas had rejected was right there, happy and loved, calling the man they hated most Daddy. "Dad, look at this," my son said, running up to Richard and proudly showing him a drawing. Richard leaned down, smiled, and kissed him on the forehead. Thomas watched the scene, unable to look away, as if every gesture between them was a dagger aimed directly at his pride. I couldn't help but smile. Karma had arrived, and I was enjoying every second of his silent punishment. "Is that?" Thomas began to say, but his voice broke. I approached slowly, with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "Yes, Thomas. That is your son. The one you despised without even giving him a chance. But don't worry, he's in good hands." Thomas clenched his fists, powerless. Chloe took his arm, but he barely reacted. The man who thought he had won everything now realized he had lost it all. Richard stood up, holding our son's hand, and looked at me with that calm expression I so admired. "It's time to go, honey," he said, touching my shoulder. We walked away together, leaving Thomas and Chloe alone in their misery. Life had come full circle, and this time, I was the winner. After that encounter at the gala, I knew something inside Thomas had broken forever. From that moment on, rumors about him and his family began to spread like wildfire. I wouldn't be surprised if Richard had leaked uncomfortable details about Thomas' finances and dirty business dealings to the press. Slowly, his empire began to shake. Investors grew suspicious, partners broke contracts, and the pristine image of his company crumbled before everyone's eyes. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction every time I read the headlines. "How does it feel, Thomas?" I thought, reclining on the sofa next to Richard and our son. "How does it feel to lose everything?" Chloe didn't take long to face the consequences either. Her exclusive, elitist social circle in the Hamptons cast her aside as soon as her relationship with Thomas stopped being convenient. The same people who used to praise her were now whispering about her failed relationships and personal shortcomings. And the worst part for her was seeing the doors that were always open begin to close, one by one. Without power, money, or influence, her beauty faded like an old memory. Meanwhile, our life flourished. Richard and I consolidated our relationship both personally and professionally. He continued to expand his business empire. And for the first time, I found a purpose of my own beyond my family and my past. I opened a small art gallery in Soho, a dream I had postponed for years. It was my way of reclaiming what Thomas had taken from me, my identity and my independence. Months later, on an unexpected day, Thomas appeared at our doorstep. So much time had passed that I almost didn't recognize him. His face, once so arrogant and self-assured, now showed the tracks of exhaustion and defeat. He was thin, with deep circles under his eyes, as if the weight of the world had collapsed on him. "I need to talk to you, Claire," he said in a raspy voice. I let him in more out of curiosity than courtesy. Richard wasn't home, and our son was playing in his room. We sat in the living room, and for several seconds, the silence was absolute. Finally, Thomas broke the ice. "I made mistakes. I lost what I loved most, and now I want to fix it. I want to know my son." I felt a bitter laugh bubble up from deep within me. He was so predictable it was almost pathetic. Of course, now that his life was in shambles, he realized what he had lost. Thomas, it's too late. Your son has a father, and it isn't you. His face crumpled. He had expected redemption, perhaps even a second chance. The only thing he had left was the weight of his bad decisions. Claire, please, he whispered, his eyes glassing over. I leaned toward him, letting him feel every word like a dagger. You rejected him. You have no right to him now. You're just another stranger. He stood up slowly, as if the weight of my words had crushed him. He left without saying goodbye, with slumped shoulders and a broken soul. I closed the door behind him and, for the first time in years, breathed a sigh of relief. I had won this time. There were no screams or arguments, just the devastating silence of defeat. As the months passed, Thomas and Chloe slowly vanished from the social map. The debts consumed them, the rumors drowned them, and what remained of their reputation simply evaporated. No one missed them, no one even remembered them. They sank into misery, trapped in an endless cycle of accusations and mutual reproaches. One day, I heard that Chloe had finally left him, leaving him entirely alone. Their relationship couldn't survive the collapse. It was inevitable. They had used each other until there was nothing left to squeeze out. That was the last time I heard anything about them. While they were burning in their own personal hell, our life continued to bloom. Richard and I built something solid. A real family without secrets or betrayals. My son grew up surrounded by love and protection. In his eyes, I saw a bright future, a future he never would have known if I had stayed trapped in my past with Thomas. Every morning, waking up and seeing him run into Richard's arms, I felt an indescribable satisfaction. I had won more than I ever imagined. I hadn't just found love, I had created a full and meaningful life, free from the shadows that used to haunt me. One day, while we were walking through Central Park, my son looked at Richard and asked, "Daddy, why don't I have another dad?" Richard pulled him into a warm embrace and replied, "Because destiny gave you the best one it could find." My heart filled with gratitude. That was the perfect closure, the confirmation that everything had been worth it. There was no need to look back, the past no longer held power over me. Years later, on a rainy afternoon, I received an anonymous letter. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was Thomas. In it, he told me how he had ended up alone, without friends or family, regretting every decision he had made. It was a plea for forgiveness, a final, desperate attempt at redemption. I read the letter in silence, feeling no emotion at all. I was no longer that woman who used to cry over him. Now I was someone free, strong, and secure. I tucked the letter into a drawer without any intention of replying. There was no point in bringing the past back into my life. I closed the drawer with a quiet smile. My revenge was complete. Fate had done its part, and I had taken care of the rest. There was no justice sweeter than living a happy life while they faded into oblivion. That night, as I lay down beside Richard, I knew I had found something more powerful than revenge. Peace. The sound of my son's laughter echoed through the house, and with that, I knew everything was exactly where it was meant to be. I had won, and this time, the victory was final. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories to come.